Hey guys, this is Dave. Now, I recently reviewed Meyer Audio's CK2V, and at the time of the review, it edged out the Dragonfly 81T for the number 5 spot around this $200 price point. But then, not too long after that, I reviewed the Meyer Alba, and because the Alba landed in my top 3, it actually pushed the CK2V into 6th place and out of my top 5. So now we have this, the Meyer Audio SLIIVO or SLIIVO SL224, which this is priced a little higher than both the Alba and CK2V. It's priced at $269. So it's about the same price as the Tantrum Force. And of course, because of where they priced this, closer to that $300 price point, I had to approach this review with my expectations a little bit higher because there are just so many great IEMs in this $200 to $300 price range. And there's also some great ones even under $200. So of course, my goal was to not only try and determine if this could compete with some of my favorite sub $200 IEMs like the Alba, but also try and kind of see or determine if it could actually compete with some of my favorites around the $300 price point like the Volume S. So obviously the SL224 has a pretty high bar to reach. So I guess the real question is, can it reach that bar? Well, let's find out. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get started. Okay, so again, the SL224 is priced at $269, and in terms of accessories, it's pretty straightforward. You have the IEMs and cable, of course, and since the cable is modular, they've also included a 4.4 balanced, 3.5 single-ended, and a Type-C USB interchangeable termination. They've also included a pretty decent amount of ear tips, and then kind of a small but functional case as far as the driver configuration. It has 2 dynamic drivers, 2 balanced armature drivers, and then 4 micro planar drivers, hence the name 224. The drivers are housed in this 3D printed resin shell. As for fit and comfort, I had no issues achieving a nice, comfortable, and pretty secure fit. I would actually even say this is probably among some of the more comfortable sets that I've tried. As far as the design, I think they did a really nice job. Apparently, they used genuine shellfish materials, so I'm guessing probably mother of pearl. It does look genuine, and with this extra glossy finish, it does actually bring a little bit of dimension and depth to the design. And then I also think this chrome outline is a nice touch as well. And I think the gray cable looks really nice too. But I think the thing that really impressed me about the cable was that not only is it modular, which I guess that is kind of to be expected at this price point now, but what I think sets this apart from a lot of other cables in this price range is its build quality. It's just exceptional for this price point. It's very soft and it's not prone to tangling, and it also has minimal issues with memory. And what that means in terms of just general manageability, this is probably one of the better, or maybe even among the best cables that I've seen at this price point. So even taking into consideration that this is priced a little higher than some of the competition, I really do feel like they did a good job with the design, the fit, the comfort. And again, I just think they put together a pretty reasonable package as far as its accessories for this price point. But of course, the big question is, how does it sound? Well, let's talk about that. Okay, so as far as the general presentation of the SL224, it does strike me as having a pretty neutral presentation, but with highlighted upper mids and sub bass. And while I do find this set to be generally balanced, I do feel like my attention is being pulled more towards the upper mid range. And while I would say this does a lot of things pretty well, to me, I think its greatest strength is how naturally it produces vocals and also instruments that might land in the upper mid range, such as pianos, guitars, horns, and then also maybe some percussive instruments that land in the upper mids as well. My biggest complaint would probably be that it can sometimes be a little too vocal forward, and it can also sound a little thin in the low mids and also the mid bass. But let's go ahead and break everything down just a little more, and as usual, we'll start with the bass. So as far as its bass energy, when compared with the rest of its presentation overall, it is a little more laid back and it has a more neutral presentation. Although when I was listening to tracks that have a little more sub bass energy, those sub bass frequencies did seem to be somewhat highlighted. So with those tracks, it did seem to up the engagement and bring a little more fun to the SL224's presentation. So because of that extra bass extension, those sub bass frequencies are going to add a pretty nice foundation for the rest of the bass frequencies. However, because the bass is more sub bass focused with tracks that don't have much in the way of sub bass, like a lot of classic rock recordings, I definitely noticed my attention being pulled again towards the top half of its tuning. And that's not to say there isn't adequate mid-bass energy. However, depending on your bass preferences and your library, for some, it could come across as being a little bass light. I know for me, with certain tracks, I could at times find myself wanting a little more bass energy. And I also do wish there was a little more mid bass and low mid energy, because if I step back and take more of a bird's eye view of the low mid range and the mid bass, to me, that lack of energy in those areas can cause its overall presentation to sound thin and lacking in note weight at times. Now, as far as bass quality, I have to say I was pretty impressed with bass texture for this price point, and I did feel like they handled that transition out of the bass into the low mids quite well, because I didn't notice any significant bass bleed into the low mids, which resulted in an overall pretty clean mid-range presentation. So you've got that controlled transition into the mids out of the bass, so you don't have to worry about the bass encroaching into the low mid-range presentation. Although again, I do feel like they could have probably brought a little more energy into the mid bass and low mids, and they probably could have still kept things pretty clean and controlled. And then moving into the mid-range, again, we know we've got good mid-range clarity. And as I had mentioned at the beginning of the sound segment, another attribute of the mid-range that kind of impressed me was how naturally it portrayed vocals. And for those of you that know me, you'll know that's kind of a pet peeve of mine. So that's definitely good. I just wish it sounded a little fuller and had just a little more richness and a little more note weight. Now, one other issue is just the sheer amount of vocal energy. And if you take the graph of the SL224 and if you lay it on top of the CK2V, which again, that's currently my favorite Meyer audio IEM, it made my top 5, you will see a fairly significant difference in both their vocal energy and their bass energy. And of the two, I still do prefer the CK2V. But I should point out, I do feel like they kind of have the opposite problem. So with the CK2V, it actually is a little bass heavy for me, albeit still my preferred IEM, again, of the two sets. So the SL224 does have some vocal forwardness, and while it does sound pretty natural and has good clarity, again, it's also riding that line of just sounding a little bit thin. Now, as far as the treble, again, we have 4 microplanar drivers handling the highs, and for them using so many microplanars, I think they did a really good job at keeping those planars sounding pretty natural, and they were able to avoid some of that metallic timbre that can sometimes be associated with microplanars. So its treble presentation does not come across as unnatural, and I would say it even has a little bit of smoothness to it. At the same time, I feel like I'm getting exceptionally good treble detail for this price point. Additionally, it also has good treble extension past 10K, which brings a little bit of airiness to its presentation, and it also adds some of those micro nuances and micro details as well, which brings us to technical performance. Now, one of its more impressive technical attributes that kind of jumped out at me, even more than its detail retrieval, was the instrument separation and imaging. And I don't know if I would say that it has a wide soundstage necessarily, although I would say it's at least average width, but it is certainly wide enough for me. But instrument focus is really, really good, as is, again, the layering and the separation. So from a technical standpoint, I would consider this to be right up there with some of my favorite IEMs under $300. And that brings us to comparisons. And as you can see, I've got a few of my favorite sets around this price point, the Volume S being my top set around $300. And I would say the Volume S still retains that top spot, as it just comes closer to my tuning preference because it has more of that mid-bass presence that the SL224 is lacking, and it's just more balanced, and it even has probably better technicalities. And I would say the same thing about the DaVinci as well. Its bass levels are closer to my preference. It's just generally more balanced and natural, and while its technical performance is probably on par with the SL224, the DaVinci is just much smoother, and it's just more pleasing to my ears. Now, I will say, I do prefer the tuning of the SL224 over the Tantrum Force, because the Force is even more vocal forward than the 224. Plus, the Force doesn't have that sub-bass extension that the SL224 has. So the SL224 just strikes me as being a little more balanced than the Force. Now, comparing the SL224 with a couple of other less expensive IEMs, we'll go ahead and start with the 61T, which is my favorite IEM around the $200 price point. So it is less expensive than the SL224. Now, I'll just say it, I do still prefer the 61T over the SL224 because to my ears, it's more balanced. Vocals have that richness that I love. It also has more bass, it has smoother upper mids, and in my opinion, it's at least as natural, maybe even a little more natural sounding than the SL224, and it's equally as technical. And the same goes for the 5+2 and the Alba. Both of those have a little more bass presence, vocals are more rich, mids are smoother, and they both also have as good or better technical performance than the 224. Now again, I should reiterate, this is purely based on my tuning preferences, and by no means do I think this is a bad IEM. On the contrary, if you are a vocal lover, as vocal or mid-centric IEMs go within this price range, I would actually consider this to probably be one of the better options, because again, vocals sound very natural. They are more forward, so they certainly are the star of the show. And while they are maybe a little more forward than I prefer, I think a lot of vocal lovers will likely find these to be just about right. And while the bass energy isn't quite there for me, the bass quality is still very good. The treble is also tuned very nicely for this type of presentation. It has great technical performance as far as detail levels, imaging, and layering. So I guess, as I had mentioned at the start of the sound segment, while its tuning doesn't necessarily align with my preferences, there is no denying this gets a lot right. And again, if you are a vocal lover and you can appreciate good technical performance for this price point, this could be a great option for you. Not to mention the build quality is very, very good. I love the faceplate design, and it has a great cable as well. All right, I think that does it for this review. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch. If you like my content, please take a second and hit that subscribe button. Also, if you would, please let me know what you think in the comment section. Please like this video, please share this video. I hope you guys have an awesome day.